along with the rest of the Big 12. All right, I mentioned who had the best weekend, and you guys can say all of the above if you want. Brigham Young coming high off that win against Baylor, smoked by Oregon. Houston beaten by Kansas, and yes, Kansas is a great story right now in college football. Michigan State beaten up by Washington, and Miami goes into College Station. They have a pretty good football team and a very high intense game. A&M suspended some of their star freshmen before the game. Good for them. They need to do that. And then they had just enough with Max Johnson as their quarterback.
Was there more of a mockery of the top 25 rankings than A&M and Miami this weekend?
Yeah. I mean,
well done.
Miami, we knew that they didn't have, like we said the other day, this isn't Lamar Thomas and Corus Copeland, run and go routes on people, but A&M shut them down. I mean, really did shut them down. And they couldn't sniff the end zone. A&M played really well in the red zone. But A&M's offense is only slightly buoyed by Max Johnson, meaning they probably have more. I think that's probably more a schematic thing, too. I'm not to say that Max Johnson's going to make everything better, but yeah, I mean, it's everything we kind of said about them is true.
Tyler Van Dyke, it can be a good quarterback, but he can also make himself a not very good quarterback, and I think you saw him making himself not a very good quarterback, and the A&M defense certainly helped with that as well. But, yeah, not a very good day for him at all. Miami has a stunning lack of weaponry. They lose Restrepo, who's a solid number 2 wide receiver, and that's like a dagger for them. And they had like nothing offensively as far as weapons go. And then A&M is basically Devin Achane. And, I know there might be a sprinkle of Anaya Smith in there. But, yeah, I mean, Max Johnson was slightly better maybe overall, like the end result.
He was, to me, more mature in how he handled the game.
He should be, yeah.
Took what he could get without trying to bite off more than he could chew.
But he didn't change that offense all that much for the better. I mean, it was still a 17-9 win when all was said and done. And, give whatever credit you want to give to the opponent and everything. But, yeah, Jimbo's got a big offensive problem right now. I mean, that they're eking out games like
what is it? And Smith and then Achane, right?
Yeah, that's what I just said. Yeah. And Achane had an okay day where he, receiving and rushing wise, he was able to make an impact. But yeah, outside of those guys, they are. I mean, both those teams. I mean, for A&M and Miami, the way that they've recruited and the brands and all of that, for them to have such a stunning lack of playmakers was really. I mean, I guess it wasn't shocking because we kind of knew that going in, but it was still surprising to see like how much they're really struggling in that area. But yeah, that was an interesting outcome.
I think a lot of the issues for A&M and the offense is also the offensive line with a lot of those players that they have brought in, and they don't seem to have much push. But Achane and Smith are really fun. I'll say this, and we don't have to touch too much on it, but the story came out that some freshmen were suspended for the game. They got out late. One of them was the one driving around in the parking garage. Evan Stewart was one of the names, of phenomenal, talented freshman receiver.
He suited up, I think, didn't he?
But that's what they need. They need to get a hold of that quickly. And whether or not that would have happened had they won the game against Appalachian State, I don't know. But you got to get in that quickly, because if you don't, we know what's going to happen.
Yeah, just to let you know how bad Miami's struggling on the skill players. A&M, after targeting penalties, their whole starting secondary was out.
Yeah. And both of them were right in the side with the crown of the helmet. One of them was, I still think in the targeting penalties, the offensive player leaning a helmet down as well can make that interesting. But if you lead with your head, doesn't matter what the offensive player does. How about Kansas State? They blew a tire. We've been popping up on it. We've been, Oklahoma State rolled, Texas. They had, UTSA had them kind of in a little bit of it, and then they just kind of had too much. Bijan Robinson was fantastic. But how about Kansas State? And that's a team that we've been kind of scratching their back a little bit, and they just went down to Tulane on Saturday.
Yeah, that was that was something they did not need if they want to be taken for real. Losing to Tulane, you're not supposed to lose. And look, ask A&M how much the shine can come off of you once you lose to a non-Power 5 opponent. It can come off real fast. And Kansas State, for all the good things that they've been doing, they still go out and do this, which I don't know what that means to the Big 12 Conference, but the way I see things shaking out right now, I've changed my thought about where they are, maybe drop them down a couple spots compared to everybody else. But also after BYU and Oregon and then Baylor and BYU last week and how Oregon got stomped by Georgia, here's what I know about college football right now. The Georgia Bulldogs and everybody else, because there seems to be parity everywhere up at the top.
Georgia, Ohio State, again, they beat the hell out of Toledo with 77, but they are still so loaded. But can they do it on both sides of the field? You have Alabama right there, and then we'll figure out Michigan and Clemson at some point too.
A lot of the Kansas State hope was based off of if Adrian Martinez could be a much better player than he was in Nebraska. And it almost feels as though he's trying to not make mistakes and therefore is basically just scared to play full-on football. And their offense is, it's not very good at all. They're not going to just drop a couple spots. They should plummet because I don't see any reason why you should sit there and really take them as seriously as you maybe were prior to this week in terms of on top of the Big 12 Conference. Not saying they can't win a bunch of games, not saying they can't still compete for the title, but they got some serious things to figure out on offense with Adrian Martinez if they want to do that.
Yep.
And they have a guy who's clearly got a lot of talent. And initially, early on, they winning, their first couple games and feeling good about it. But a lot of that's, going back to Deuce Vaughn and what an integral part of the offense that he is. But, Tulane didn't even play a flawless game by any means. And you're sitting there, it's a 10-7 ball game at halftime. What an effort by the Green Wave. I mean, I think you got to give them a lot of credit for sitting in there and fighting and scratching and clawing and making some key plays and getting that score in the fourth quarter. But K-State's got some issues offensively that they need to figure out, and they've got the big OC hire that's the hometown favorite and everything like that, and the big transfer quarterback. But they're Deuce Vaughn or bust, basically, and that's just not going to cut it. And Adrian Martinez, pretty pedestrian stat line. It's 150 yards passing and a touchdown on the day, and able to run for about 60 yards, but that's just not going to cut it if Deuce Vaughn's not running for about 203 touchdowns, which he was not doing on Saturday.
All right, let me go over a couple more things, college football, rapid fire, and you guys can respond. This is from Harold R. Kuntz III. Jacob, I sent Garrett a ton of graphics. I don't know which ones you have available. This is about Kansas. You may not have it available. But he put this out there. Turner Gill, Charlie Weiss, Clint Bowen, David Beatty, and Les Miles combined for 2 road wins among all of them. Lance Leipold has 3 already.
In 2 seasons.
And you don't take that for granted
3,
because, it was hard for them to win on the road. Of course, it was hard for them to even win at home. And put that one up there again, Jacob, if you don't mind. That's a great stat. Turner Gill, Charlie Weiss, Clint Bowen, David Beatty, Les Miles, all. And the quarterback, I think Daniels is a Les Miles recruit. And thank God for that because he's phenomenal. Combined for 2 road wins among all of them. And Lance Leipold already now has 3. Great stat from Harold R. Kuntz III on Twitter.
Houston's got huge problems, clearly. This is not what was expected of them. They were talked about as one of the darling G5s potentially that could sneak their way into the playoff with a good year, and they're going to be lucky to make a bowl game based on the direction they're going. Now, granted, they had a really tough start to the season, so that's even with, some good teams still remaining, their schedule will ease up a little bit. But, no, you see a player, you see receivers fighting on the sideline in the midst of that loss on Saturday. That was ugly. You'd never see that in college football. You never see that really anywhere, quite frankly, of a guy going to the sideline. You see guys maybe barking at each other, but it's full-blown shoving his teammate to the ground and scrapping it up, right there amidst the team in the middle of a game. That was a really bad scene for Holgorsen and Houston, and it just feels like they're a team that's falling apart, and it's, coming apart at the seams. And I don't know what's going on in that locker room or what, needs to be taken care of, but I expected a lot more out of them than we've seen this year. And again, granted, they played a tough schedule to start, but when you saw that sideline part of things, that's when the opinion, that's not just, you're playing a tough schedule or you're losing games. That's when you go, okay, there are much bigger issues going on in Houston than we realized if that's happening on the sidelines in front of full public view. So very interesting to see where that goes.
That was a bad story, bad situation. Now, Herm Edwards out at Arizona State. Michelle Gardner covers ASU. She'll join us much later in the show today at 5:20 to discuss it. And I don't know, Jacob, again, I sent Garrett like a lot of things over the weekend. Is the video of Herm Edwards coming off the field And the president and the AD, Ray Anderson, were both there in the end zone as Herm Edwards was coming off the field after a really difficult loss to Eastern Michigan. And don't have it, that's fine. And he was gone, like before the end of the night.
Yeah. And NCAA investigation, and they're playing poorly. This was going to end eventually. I thought it might end a little bit later, but of course I didn't see them losing to Eastern Michigan. I didn't have that on my bingo card, so
would have made a lot of money.
Yeah.
Here's a note about Eastern Michigan from Steve Berkowitz, who's great about financial stuff when it comes to college sports. Since 2017, Eastern Michigan has 4 wins over Power 5 teams that has also earned them a combined nearly $4 million. Arizona State for $1.5 million, Illinois, Purdue, and Rutgers. How about that?
Purdue got off cheap. Good for you, Purdue.
Yeah, they did. But that's a chunk of money and a huge win that knocked Herm Edwards to the sideline. At least he may be on NFL game day or whatever you want to call it by the weekend.
No surprise whatsoever. I mean, I don't even really get all that surprised by the timing. I guess I am surprised just because the way that I guess certain buyouts are and whatnot, that it's just funny to me to get all the way to this point where we're 2-3 weeks into the season and now you fire guys because of buyouts or just feelings or whatever. It's like, what were the most obvious firings in this offseason? Scott Frost, Herm Edwards, it's going to be Brian Harsin, it's going to be Carl Durrell. Now, some of those might be, again, affected. Like a Carl Durrell, I think it's like a crazy buyout of like $11 million right now or something. Now, maybe Colorado pays that. Maybe they don't. But outside of the buyouts, like, yeah, these were all obvious. And do y'all realize who Ray Anderson is? Like, y'all know who that is, right?
He was Herm Edwards' agent.
Herm Edwards' agent.
Yeah.
So, he obviously had a big, piece in the decision of bringing Herm Edwards on. And now he's, part of the decision to, in some ways, let him go. But I'm curious about how far he's going to, be able to stick, or how much he's going to be able to stick around because, you fire the football coach, but ultimately, if things don't improve, where do you start to look? You start to look at the AD, especially when he made the misfire at football coach. I think that's a good job, barring that you can explain the NCAA implications away and kind of soothe, feelings over how much of an obstacle that might be. I don't think any of us expect the NCAA to just like destroy programs anymore, but like, could it get a little sticky, icky as far as what you're having to deal with scholarship-wise or penalty-wise? Maybe that's a deterrent to some extent, and maybe the AD's a deterrent. I don't know, but they've got some things to figure out. But that will be a job that a number of people I'm sure will definitely be interested in, and I'm sure a ton will kick the tires on because of location and either way they're going to be in the pack unless crazy things happen. But even then, I think that's a school that's got a lot going for it, and they're a bit of a mess right now. But I think that there will still be some people that are, looking at that job long and hard. But yeah, I'm not surprised at all that Herm Edwards was out. That was a foregone conclusion in my mind.
UCF lost a couple weeks ago to Louisville. Houston beaten by Kansas. Brigham Young loses at Oregon. There's no disrespect losing to Oregon anytime, but that was one-sided and got at one point like 38-7, whatever the score was.
That final score was not indicative of how much they got their tails kicked.
You wonder if the emotions that put into the game, and it's not because it was Baylor like they're playing Alabama, but that game meant a great deal to them after what happened here in Waco a year ago. And you just wonder if they got so high for that one that they, how can you overlook Oregon? Just because Georgia crushed them, well, they beat everybody. So Brigham Young, Houston, and UCF have gone down recently. Cincinnati, of course, an incoming Big 12 team, has bounced back after that loss to Arkansas to start the year.
Yeah, and they were in trouble at least early on Saturday, so it was good to see them rally and go ahead and take care of business when all was said and done. But there was a moment of scoreboard watching for Cincy earlier, like, oh, okay, oh, well, hope that works out. BYU, on the other hand, I think we saw a couple of different things. I think BYU is still a very good team, but I don't think they're quite playoff caliber. And I think that some of the things that Baylor wasn't able to expose, Oregon was able to expose. And I do think that, when you look at the atmosphere that was the Baylor game, there was carryover from the year before. They had basically taken that throughout the offseason, the disrespect that they felt and the way they were bullied by Baylor specifically. And that was like a year-long thing and build up into that game. That was the late-night crowd with a raucous scene and just a lot of emotions involved. And they absolutely, I have no doubts about it, they emptied their tank. against Baylor. And then they turned around and they didn't have the home backing and they didn't have the built-in storyline. And then all of a sudden they had all this attention and a near top 10 ranking. And like, man, if they can get past Oregon, they might go to the playoff and like all this stuff. And meanwhile, they're physically spent after the week prior. And double overtime. Like, let's not forget, like that Baylor game, it wasn't like they just blew out Baylor and just took care. Like, that was double overtime, and Baylor didn't even play all that well. Oregon played a really good game. They got good Bo Nix, and they've got some weapons, and they were at home, and it was, middle of the day, and all the things that were in BYU's favor were not in their favor, and they were coming off of a tough win, and I think that all just added up, and Oregon's, not a bad team by any stretch. How good they are, I'm not all the way sure just yet, but Bo Nix is playing well. They're pretty dang good, and they were pretty dang good on Saturday.
Bo Nix seems to me over his career like he has some sort of stockpile of magic elixir, but it's limited, so he's been judicious about it because there are days where you watch him and like clearly he has not taken the magic elixir. He took.
You can only take so much.
Yeah, you can take so much.
He
did on Saturday. He looked great, and that's the Bo Nix that I think Auburn thought they were going to have all the time. From when he was a veteran, but
he could sure use it right now.
He's up and down.
Yeah,
he's kind of their version of what Spencer Sanders was last year. And Oklahoma State has just rolled yet again. They're cruising along. They have an off week this week. I believe it's this week. Yeah, I think it is. They have an off week, and then they have Baylor on October the 1st. So they get a chance to sit back, chill out a little bit after a 3-0 start to start the year. One other coaching fire. Nebraska's not done. Mickey Joseph in Nebraska was smoked immediately, basically, by Oklahoma. Eric Shernander, defensive coordinator, who probably should have been fired the same day they fired Scott Frost. He's out after an embarrassing performance at home against the Sooners.
That was weird timing. Like you said, just a week after Frost goes. I think that there is whoever comes in next is going to have to just transfer portal the hell out of this roster, especially on defense, in my opinion. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but I don't think that they line up very well with the teams that they're supposed to be lining up very well against, especially on defense. And they were outclassed, in terms of what we saw on Saturday. That was the fear.
Outclassed in every way.
With Oklahoma coming in, though, especially offensively, and Jeff Lebby's offense, the Briles offense, evolving over these past few years, with Lebby's evolving as an assistant coach and offensive coordinator, and his stops at UCF and Ole Miss and so on. He's good at what he does, and he knows Dylan Gabriel, and Dylan Gabriel's good, and they got good skill guys, and Marvin Mims is really coming to his own once again and is thriving, and others are as well, and they've got a lot of confidence right now in Oklahoma, and they're playing good complementary football. The question with that offense has always been, like, can you play great defense and play that offense at its peak? And we've never seen really anybody like that true style of that version do that. You can play pretty solid defense, but consistently very good. It's really hard to do that because of how much you're out on the field, and things like that. But right now, Oklahoma is taking care of business, and they didn't fall into the lull of like, win one for the Gipper or Nebraska, let's win one for Mickey Joseph. Like, there was none of that. They were like, we're smashing the gas, and you can try to keep up if you want, but you're probably not going to be able to. And Nebraska had no chance to keep up with them.
That's the last time we should talk about them, honestly, until they hire a new coach.
I don't think